There we go. All right. So, good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, depending on where on this ponderous spinning globe you are. I'm Tad, still Tad. Planning to continue being Tad, and I will be here for the next hour, which will interestingly be the same hour when we finish, because of course, well, at least for me here in America, specifically in California, it is the daylight savings time tango that we are doing tonight. So, although it is 1 o'clock now, well, actually 1:01, when it finishes here, it will magically jump back to 1 o'clock again, which is good because I have to get up early because we're supposed to go to brunch somewhere tomorrow. Uh, People I love. Don't get me wrong. I love these people. They're really nice people. They're some of my dearest friends. It's just the hour is going to be a little awkward for me, but I'll manage. So anyway, so hello, my wild darlings, my unstoppable tiny army. Lovely to see you. What is going up? Well, we are 2 days to the election, and that is the extent of the political conversation I'm going to have tonight. Anybody who's curious about my political predilections, I think it really is trying to avoid them at this point. But as I always say, this is a reading thing, this is a sharing time thing, and I don't want anybody to feel pushed out because they're different about some things than I am. That said, it will be a relief when it's all over. So we are actually, because one of our young people is having a birthday, actually today. We have just tipped over into November the 3rd, and it is his birthday today. But because of that, on election night, we are going to be going to see Godzilla -1, which will be less stressful, I think, in many ways than sitting home and watching things. And I've already seen Godzilla -1. I think Deborah hasn't, and I don't think our daughter has either, but I think the others who are coming along have all seen it. And if you haven't seen it, and if you're at all curious about it, or have heard something about it and went, I thought it was really, really good. There have been two excellent Godzilla movies in the last few years. One of them was Shin Godzilla, which took a very different approach to the monster. And was primarily monster oriented, although a lot of it also was came out in the wake of the Fukushima disaster, the tsunami and the nuclear power plant disaster in Japan. And as a result, it carries a lot of baggage from that particular time in Japanese society. That's Shin Godzilla. It also introduces the concept of Godzilla as an evolving monster, not a simply all done, this is what it is, but as a monster that continues to evolve, and it's very good. Godzilla -1 is quite different. Since I've started this, I'll just finish up with explaining to you that the reason it's -1 is because it actually is supposed to take place chronologically before the first Godzilla movie. If you will remember the first Godzilla movie, Godzilla was just a menace, and it was in some ways what's the word I'm looking for? It was a callback to the nuclear horrors of the Second World War for Japan, which of course to this point is the only country that has ever been the recipients of an atomic bomb, let alone two of them. And that whole kind of thing, the post-war thing, washes all through Godzilla -1. And in fact, it's much more of a character movie. Its main character is a failed kamikaze pilot. In other words, by failed, it means his plane did not crash into an Allied ship or anything like that. That did not happen. How that did not happen is part of the plot. But then Godzilla makes his first appearance at that point in time. And what it has in common with Shin Godzilla is it goes back to the old Godzilla lore that Godzilla is just scary as hell and is a monster and may have been caused by nuclear testing or whatever, but there's no This is not, the friendly Godzilla, the one who's saving us from other monsters, which is kind of what they're doing with the most recent reboots of Godzilla, the ones that's linked to the King Kong franchise and all that stuff. So anyway, won't go into detail, but it is a good movie. If you haven't seen it, you don't want to go out and see it in a theater, it's worth checking out on, cable or something like that. As far as any other interesting tales and stuff, I'm still cranking along on The Splintered Sun. As I said last week, I am feeling good about it. I'm feeling as though I've begun to see how it's going to work. I'm about 160 something pages into it at this point, and it feels like it's where it wants to be for a book that's going to be maybe a little less than War of the Flowers, maybe a little more than Tailchaser's Song, but somewhere in that general vicinity. In other words, it's not going to be a hideously overblown multi-volume thing, which it was not intended to be. If anything, it's intended to be the starting point for a story I can go back to and characters I can revisit. So, but it's complete in this story arc, which means if you only read the first book, you will not be going, oh my God, now I'll never find out what happened, because stuff happens in this book. And it is essentially a closed circle if you want it to be that way. But if you are into the characters and I decide to write more books, then there will be more books about those characters. Okay, what else? Not a whole lot. Again, we're just we're actually we are finally doing some stuff that we wanted to do with the house. We've been wanting to for years. So there's a bunch of kind of small construction and some electrical stuff that has to be done, and we're having some painting done in the living room. The person doing the painting is somebody we like very much, so that's fine. We get along really well with him, and everybody is, he's done a lot of work for us. Great guy. And let me think. So that's been going on. So as a result, I've been kind of disappearing downstairs to work, just to not be in the way, which is good for the writing. To know that if you go upstairs, you're going to be stepping over things of paint and stuff like that. It tends to keep you with your butt in the seat, doing what you're supposed to do. So as I said, I've been doing a lot of writing in the last week or so. Deb's fine. She's doing well. The dogs and cats, all well. You may very well see the cats tromping around in the background, although they have had their treats in their magical puzzle box for the night, so they may also be just like, we're done. We've done everything that we feel we need to do tonight. Doggy's good. Walter on heavy antibiotics because of a mouth issue, but he's fine. As fine as a very old, nearly senile, largely deaf and blind dog who only weighs 4 pounds can be. But he's happy, and he's cuddled up right now. With Deb in bed, which is what he likes. And in fact, it's my only complaint. I'm very fond of that dog. I'm fond of all our pets. But he's so anxious to get into bed with me or anybody and be warmed that he literally will start to get into your lap as you're sitting down, or he will scoot under you as you're trying to sit down. And of course, he's a tiny little thing. I have never directly sat on him, but I have occasionally sat on one of his feet or his tail, and then he lets out this hideous shriek. I mean, honestly, it's like the banshee of Irish legend. He'll let out this terrible shriek, so you're positive you've broken every bone in his tiny little body. No, he's just, that's what he does. But Big Dog Johnny, who is the world's most nervous dog, immediately will leap up, out of a dead sleep at Walter's squeal and leave the room. He never hesitates. He never looks around and goes, oh, does Walter need my help? No, he's like, oh, and he runs, which is really irritating when you get everybody set for the night and everybody is calmed down and you're like, okay, now we can have some quiet time. We can watch some archaeology on TV, or one of the things that Deb and I like to do. And then all of a sudden you accidentally put your arm down and there's this hideous nail down a chalkboard squeal from Walter, and Johnny abandons the room and starts scratching at the glass door to be let outside to get as far away from whatever's wrong as possible. Bless him. I'm certainly not counting on Johnny to protect us if we are ever burglarized. Although he might. One of the things about him is that he hates conflict, but when he feels like he has to defend something, like the only two fights he's ever gotten in with other dogs were both at our gate. Although certainly neither of them was the fault of the other dogs, even though they were at our gate, but that's a long story. So who knows? Maybe he might suddenly decide, well, there are some things even more important than my terror, and he would leap in to save us. But I don't know if I'm counting on that. Okay, what else? Anything else? I can't really think of anything. As I said, just a lot of noise, in the sense of things happening around, which is one of the reasons why I kind of try to stay out of the way of it so I can think of what I'm working on. So I can't think of anything else that I need to tell anybody about. Oh, except that the book is officially, I think, going out into stores now, The Navigator's Children. I got my copies of it from the publisher. I know a few of the other participants, the cannoneers, as I call them, the people who did so much important work, keeping me focused and giving me information that I had long ago forgotten, if I had ever bothered to retain it in the first place, about my own work, embarrassing as it is to admit it. So I know those copies have gone out because Ron Hyde mentioned that he had received his copy. So those are just about to come out. Those of you who have pre-ordered, I'm sure you'll be getting some kind of word now soon. Those of you who haven't pre-ordered, what's wrong with you? Now, like I said, I make no judgment. That's what libraries are for. That's what used bookstores are for. Not everybody has the budget to run out and buy a new hardcover. And I certainly understand that. My entire book collection when I was young was built either things that I took out of the library, those I had to give back, but mostly they were paperbacks, used paperbacks. So I would never pretend to think there was anything wrong with not being able to afford a brand new hardcover book. I don't think I ever bought a hardcover book until I got some for my birthdays and Christmas, but I don't think I ever actually bought a hardcover book myself until I was in the business and began to feel like there was a certain karmic burden on me to participate in the hardcover marketplace. Anyway, okay, so let's see if anybody has showed up. And aha, I see that a few have. And let me see, what have we got here? No, I don't want captions. Oh, God, where did the frickin' comments go again? As usual, I can only see a few captions. Why is that not where I can read it? No, it's not going to do that. These buggers, they make me mad. Okay, well, I see that Cliff is here. Hello, Cliff. Hope you and the family are good. I see that Becky Dillon is here. Winter. Hello, darling. Natan Nazikin, or Nazikin, or Natan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. Please feel free to correct me so that I will maybe know in the future. Penny Davies is here. Kella Campbell. That's a new name. Hello, Kella. Good to have you. Matthew Anderson. A pleasure. Good to see you. Isaac. Isaac says it's snowing in the valley. Hooray, hooray. And Donna Verone Pearsall is also here. And I know many more people are here because I can see some numbers. But as usual, this thing is set up in such a way that I cannot see the comments. To save my life, I don't know why they do that to me, but they just do. They're just buggers that way. I won't go off in a tangent about it because you've all heard me complain about Facebook and how hard it makes it to read comments. Okay, there's another one, Stephen Watson, I see. Also, I'm getting different readings from two different versions of the same pages. Okay, so Becky went, Suzanne Owen, hello, Sandra K, hello, Jeremy, Jeremy's here. Nikki, good to see you, Nikki. Christian Fabricius is here, Fabricius. So hello, Chris, good to see you. Anamika, pleasure as always. Nicole, pleasure also. Carol, Mark Redmond, Penny Davies. So if I failed to mention you, it's because you haven't shown up on the comments or something. So you can always drop a comment. I'll try to pick it up later on. Anyway, so I think with that, I'm just going to start the reading today because, as I said, I don't have a whole lot to say. And might as well spend the time reading instead of just going blah, 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 which is something that I do a lot of. So it's not like there's anybody out there going, oh, please, Tad, babble on for another 20 or 30 minutes. At least I hope there isn't anybody out there. And if there is, please get help. Even I don't want to listen to myself babble. So we are reading The Sword and the Stone, of course. We are getting on into the book. Remember, The Sword and the Stone is a shorter book in the midst of The Once and Future King. Once and Future King is actually 4 separate volumes that were published separately, but have been combined into one single volume. So we're only reading The Sword and the Stone. That's the first one. It gets progressively darker and stranger as the story goes on because, of course, T.H. White was dealing with the entirety of the matter of Britain, the La Mort d'Arthur, the history of the Arthurian legends, etc. And because of that, as anybody knows who knows the Arthurian cycle, it doesn't end well. There's a reason why Arthur does not manage to found a dynasty, that even an imaginary dynasty, because his ending is heroic but not happy. And that is, in fact, the general subject matter of the book, is the, I would say, and of the Arthurian legends in general, is the clash between high ideals and reality. And of course, the part that is very strong in one of the other books of The Once and Future King that helps to undermine this is the illicit but very real love affair between Guinevere, Arthur's queen, and Lancelot. But that all takes place later. We're not going to be getting to that because that's not in The Sword and the Stone. Anyway, so where we were last time is Merlin, Wart, as he's called. Wart was locked in his room after being injured during the adventure with Robin Hood, where Kay killed the griffin and they rescued several people from Morgan Le Fay. And Wart had a dislocated shoulder. And so as a result, his nurse has stuck him in his room and won't let him come out until he's better. And he's so bored, he begs Merlin, who is locked out, to somehow magic him into something. And Merlin says, is the essentially, he doesn't say these literal words, but he says, is the ant farm still there? And Wart says, yeah, basically, there's 2 ant farms with a stick between them. And Merlin turns him into an ant. And the ants, interestingly enough, are kind of an Orwellian nightmare, in the sense of, because, Orwell wasn't just against the Nazis. He was against the Stalinist communists as well. He was an anti-authoritarian. And so his dystopia that is represented in this ant hill, that or this ant farm that Wart goes into, is in fact a totalitarian nightmare. And the equivalent of bread in circuses is MASH and music. MASH is what they eat. The music is, and you can tell when this was probably written, was probably the late 50s, very early 60s at the latest, but I think it must have been the late 50s, because T.H. White only lived till 1962. Because the whole point is that it's kind of also a parody. They hear announcements from the big ant, I guess, big ant, but there's this music playing in their heads all the time, which is clearly T.H. White taking a swipe at the kind of the world he was living in at the time. And all of the songs are incredibly stupid and incredibly basic and just the same kinds of words over and over again. Love, dove, above, mammy, mammy, mammy. And again, this is more of a parody of the 1940s and 50s music that T.H. White probably associated with popular radio. because, of course, in the 60s, people like Bob Dylan and the Beatles and whatnot came along and drastically changed the 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 palette of popular music and what could be written about, and brought poetry into it, and personal expression and stuff like that. Anyway, so here we are, and Wart has managed to pass himself off as one of the ants, because otherwise they would have killed him. I mean, he is an ant, but he's passed himself off as one of their ants, because otherwise they would have killed him. And he is working, eating, filling himself up with this goop, and mostly filling his crop, not himself. The first bits went to him, but now he's filled his crop, and he's going to perform his antly service, and that's what's going on. He walked away to the nest with a full gorge, leaving them to do the round again. That's the round of announcements and music that they hear in their heads or through their antennas or whatever. It's basically T.H. White trying to show you what a hive mind is like, but in terms that humans can understand. They had no news, no scandal, nothing to talk about. Novelties did not happen to them. Even the remarks about the executions were in a formula and only varied as to the registration number of the criminal. When they had finished with the mammy, 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 they had to go on to the beloved leader, and then to the filthy, barbarous bee type of ant, and to the latest execution. It went round in a circle. Even the beloveds, wonderfuls, luckies, and so on were all dones, and the awfuls were not dones. The boy found himself in the hall of the fortress, where hundreds and hundreds of ants were licking or feeding in the nurseries, carrying grubs to various aisles to get an even temperature, and opening or closing the ventilation passages. In the middle, the leader sat complacently, laying eggs, attending to the broadcasts, issuing directions or commanding executions, surrounded by a sea of adulation. He learned from Merlin, later, that the method of succession among these leaders was variable, according to the different kind of ant. In Bothrio Myrmex, for instance, the ambitious founder of a new order would invade a nest of Tapenoma and jump on the back of the older tyrant. There, concealed by the smell of her host, she would slowly saw off the latter's head until she herself had achieved the right of leadership. There was no larder for his store of mash, after all. When anybody wanted a meal, they stopped him, got him to open his mouth, and fed from it. They did not treat him as a person, and indeed they were impersonal themselves. He was a dumbwaiter, from which dumb diners fed. Even his stomach was not his own. But we need not go on about the ants in too much detail. They are not a pleasant subject. It is enough to say that the boy went on living among them, conforming to their habits, watching them so as to understand as much as he could, but unable to ask questions. It was not only that their language had not got the words in which humans are interested, so that it would have been impossible to ask them whether they believed in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but also that it was dangerous to ask questions at all. A question was a sign of insanity to them. Their life was not questionable. It was dictated. He crawled from nest to seeds and back again, exclaimed that the mammy song was loverly, opened his jaws to regurgitate, and tried to understand as well as he could. Later in the afternoon, a scouting ant wandered across the rush bridge which Merlin had commanded him to make. It was an ant of exactly the same species, but it came from the other nest. Dun, dun, dun. It was met by one of the scavenging ants and murdered. The broadcasts changed after this news had been reported, or rather, they changed as soon as it had been discovered by spies that the other nest had a good store of seeds. Mammy, mammy, mammy gave place to Antland over all, and the stream of orders were discontinued in favor of lectures about war, patriotism, or the economic situation. The fruity voice said that their beloved country was being encircled by a horde of filthy other nesters, at which the wireless chorus sang, "When other blood spurts from the knife, then everything is fine." It also explained that Ant the father had ordained in his wisdom that other nest pismires should always be the slaves of this nest ones. Their beloved country had only one feeding tray at present, a disgraceful state of affairs, which would have to be remedied if the dear race were not to perish. A third statement was that the national property of this nest was being threatened. Their boundaries were to be violated, their domestic animals, the beetles, were to be kidnapped, and their communal stomach would be starved. The wart listened to two of these broadcasts carefully so that he would be able to remember them afterwards. The first one was arranged as follows. A. We are so numerous that we are starving. B. Therefore, we must encourage still larger families so as to become yet more numerous and starving. C. When we are so numerous and starving as all that, obviously we shall have a right to take other people's stores of seed. Besides, we shall by then have a numerous and starving army. It was only after this logical train of thought had been put into practice and the output of the nurseries trebled, both nests meanwhile getting ample mash for all their needs from Merlin, for it has to be admitted that starving nations never seem to be quite so starving that they cannot afford to have far more expensive armaments than anybody else. It was only then that the second type of lecture was begun. This is how the second kind went. A. We are more numerous than they are. Therefore, we have a right to their mash. B. They are more numerous than we are. Therefore, they are wickedly trying to steal our mash. C. We are a mighty race and have a natural right to subjugate their puny one. D. They are a mighty race and are unnaturally trying to subjugate our inoffensive one. E. We must attack them in self-defense. F. They are attacking us by defending themselves. G. If we do not attack them today, they will attack us tomorrow. H. In any case, we are not attacking them at all. We are offering them incalculable benefits. After the second kind of address, the religious services began. These dated, the wart discovered later, from a fabulous past so ancient that one could scarcely find a date for it, a past in which the ants had not yet settled down to communism. They came from a time when ants were still like men, and very impressive some of the services were. A psalm at one of them, beginning, if we allow for the difference of language, with the well-known words, "The earth is the swords, and all that therein is, the compass of the bomber, and they that bomb therefrom," ended with the terrific conclusion, "Blow up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye blown up, ye everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? Even the Lord of ghosts. He is the King of glory." A strange feature was that the ordinary ants were not excited by the songs nor interested by the lectures. They accepted them as matters of course. They were rituals to them, like the mammy songs or the conversations about their beloved leader. They did not look at these things as good or bad, exciting, rational, or terrible. They did not look at them at all, but accepted them as done. The time for the war came soon enough. The preparations were in order. The soldiers were drilled to the last ounce. The walls of the nest had patriotic slogans written on them, such as "Stings or mash," or "I vow to thee my smell." And the wart was past hoping. The repeating voices in his head, which he could not shut off, the lack of privacy, under which others ate from his stomach, while others again sang in his brain, the dreary blank which replaced feeling, the dearth of all but two values, the total monotony, more than the wickedness, these had begun to kill the joy of life which belonged to his boyhood. The horrible armies were on the point of joining battle to dispute the imaginary boundary between their glass trays when Merlin came to his rescue. He magicked the sickened explorer of animals back to bed, and glad enough he was to be there. Chapter 14. In the autumn, everybody was preparing for the winter. At night, they spent the time rescuing Daddy Longlegs from their candles and rushlights. In the daytime, the cows were turned into the high stubble and weeds which had been left by the harvest sickles. The pigs were driven into the purlieus of the forest where boys beat the trees to supply them with acorns. Everybody was at a different job. From the granary there proceeded an invariable thumping of flails. In the stripped fields, the slow and enormously heavy wooden plows sailed up and down for the rye and wheat, while the sowers swung rhythmically along with their hoffers round their necks, casting right hand for left foot, and vice versa. Foraging parties came lumbering in with their spike-wheeled carts full of bracken, remarking wisely that they must get whom with ye breaks ere all summer be gone, for tethered up cattle to sit down upon, while others dragged in timber for the castle fires. The forest rang in the sharp air with the sound of beetle and wedge. Everybody was happy. The Saxons were slaves to their Norman masters, if you chose to look at it one way, but if you chose to look at it in another, they were the same farm laborers who get along on too few shillings a week today. Only neither the villein nor the farm laborer starved when the master was a man like Sir Ector. It has never been an economic proposition for an owner of cattle to starve his cows, so why should an owner of slaves starve them? The truth is that even nowadays the farm laborer accepts so little money because he does not have to throw his soul in with the bargain, as he would have to do in a town. And the same freedom of spirit has obtained in the country since the earliest times. The villeins were laborers. By the way, villain here is spelled Villeins, and many of you may know, but some may not, that is the precursor word to our villain, spelled AIN at the end, which is an interesting switch over from something meaning essentially a peasant to villain, meaning somebody bad. And I think it also slightly gives the lie to some of what I see as T.H. White's slightly romanticized version of how it is to be a farm laborer. But how would I know? I've never been a farm laborer. As he would have to do in a town, and the same freedom of spirit has obtained in the country since the earliest times. The villeins were laborers. They lived in the same one-roomed hut with their families, few chickens, litter of pigs, or with a cow, possibly called Krumbaki, most dreadful and insanitary. But they liked it. They were healthy, free of an air with no factory smoke in it, and which was most of all to them, their heart's interest was bound up with their skill in labor. They knew that Sir Ector was proud of them. They were more valuable to him than his cattle even, and as he valued his cattle more than anything else except his children, this was saying a good deal. He walked and worked among his villagers, thought of their welfare, and could tell the good workmen from the bad. He was the eternal farmer, in fact, one of those people who seem to be employing labor at so many shillings a week, but who are actually paying half as much again in voluntary overtime, providing a cottage free and possibly making an extra present of milk and eggs and home-brewed beer into the bargain. In other parts of Gramarye, that's again T.H. White's name for this magical England, in other parts of Gramarye, of course, there did exist wicked and despotic masters, feudal gangsters whom it was to be King Arthur's destiny to chasten. but the evil was in the bad people who abused it, not in the feudal system. Sir Ector was moving through these activities with a brow of thunder, when an old lady who was sitting in a hedge by one of the strips of wheat to scare away the rooks and pigeons suddenly rose up beside him with an unearthly screech. He jumped nearly a foot in the air. He was in a nervous condition. "Dang it," said Sir Ector. Then, considering the subject more attentively, he added in a loud, indignant voice, "Splendor of God!" He took the letter out of his pocket and read it again. The overlord of the castle of Forest Sauvage was more than a farmer. He was a military captain who was ready to organize and lead the defense of his estate against the gangsters, and he was a sportsman who sometimes took a day's jousting when he could spare the time. But he was not only these. Sir Ector was an MFH, or rather, a master of stag and other hounds, and he hunted his own pack himself. Clumsy, Trounier, Phoebe, Call, Girland, Talbot, Luath, Lufra, Apollon, Orthros, Bran, Gellert, Bounce, Boy, Lion, Bungie, Toby, Diamond, and Caval were not pet dogs. They were the Forest Sauvage hounds, no subscription, 2 days a week, huntsman the master. This is what the letter said, if we translate it from Latin. The king, to Sir Ector, etc. We send you William Twitey, our huntsman, and his fellows to hunt in the Forest Sauvage with our boarhounds, in order that they may capture 2 or 3 boars. You are to cause the flesh they capture to be salted and kept in good condition, but the skins you are to cause to be bleached, which they give you, as the said William shall tell you. And we command you to provide necessaries for them, as long as they shall be with you by our command, and the cost, etc., shall be accounted, etc., witnessed at the Tower of London, 20th November in the 12th year of our reign. Signed, Uther Pendragon. Now, the forest belonged to the king, and he had every right to send his hounds to hunt in it. Also, he maintained a number of hungry mouths, what with his court and his army, so that it was natural that he should want as many dead boars, bucks, roes, etc., to be salted down as possible. He was in the right. This did not take away the fact that Sir Ector regarded the forest as his forest, and resented the intrusion of the royal hounds, as if his own would not do just as well. The king had only to send for a couple of boars, and he would have been delighted to supply them himself. He feared that his coverts would be disturbed by a lot of wild royal retainers. Never know what these city chaps will be up to next. And that the king's huntsman, this fellow Twitey, would sneer at his humble hunting establishment, unsettle the hunt servants, and perhaps even try to interfere with his own kennel management. In fact, Sir Ector was shy. Then there was another thing. Where the devil were the royal hounds to be kept? Was he, Sir Ector, to turn his own hounds into the street, so as to put the king's hounds in his kennels? Splendor of God, repeated the unhappy master. It was as bad as paying tithes. Sir Ector put the accursed letter in his pocket and stumped off to the ploughing. The villains, seeing him go, remarked cheerfully, "Our old meester be on the gad again, seemingly." It was a confounded piece of tyranny. That was what it was. It happened every year, but it was still that. He always solved the kennel problem in the same way, but it still worried him. He would have to invite his neighbors to the meet, specially, to look as impressive as possible under the royal huntsman's eye, and this would mean sending messengers through the forest to Sir Grummore, etc. Then he would have to show sport. The king had written early, so that evidently he intended to send the fellow at the very beginning of the season. The season did not begin till the 25th of December. Probably the chap would insist on one of these damned Boxing Day meets. All show-off and no business, with hundreds of foot people all hollering and heading the boar and tramping down the seeds and spoiling sport generally. How the devil was he to know in November where the best boars would be on Boxing Day? What with sounders and gorgeons and hog steers, you never knew where you were. And another thing, a hound that was going to be used next summer for the proper heart hunting was always entered at Christmas to the boar. It was the very beginning of his education, which led up through hares and whatnots to its real quarry. And this meant that the fellow Twitey would be bringing down a lot of raw puppies, which would be nothing but a plague to everybody. "Dang it," said Sir Ector, and stamped upon a piece of mud. He stood gloomily for a moment, watching his two boys trying to catch the last leaves in the chase. They had not gone out with that intention, and did not really, even in those distant days, believe that every leaf you caught would mean a happy month next year. Only as the west wind tore the golden rags away, they looked fascinating and difficult to catch. For the mere sport of catching them, of shouting and laughing and feeling giddy as they looked up, and of darting about to trap the creatures, which were certainly alive in the cunning with which they slipped away, the two boys were prancing about like young fawns in the ruin of the year. Wart's shoulder was well again. The only chap, reflected Sir Ector, who could be really useful in showing the king's huntsmen proper sport was that fellow Robin Hood. Robin Wood, they seem to be calling him now. Some newfangled idea, no doubt. But Wood or Hood, he was the chap to know where a fine tush was to be found. Been feasting on the creatures for months now. He would not be surprised even if they were out of season. But you could hardly ask a fellow to hunt up a few beasts of venery for you and then not invite him to the meet. While if you did invite him to the meet, what would the king's huntsmen and the neighbors say at having a partisan for a fellow guest? Not that this Robin Wood was not a good fellow. He was a good chap and a good neighbor, too. He had often tipped Sir Ector the wink when a raiding party was on its way from the marches, and he never molested the knight or his farming in any way. What did it matter if he did chase himself a bit of venison now and then? There was 400 square miles of forest, so they said, and enough for all. Leave well alone, that was Sir Ector's motto. But that did not alter the neighbors. Another thing was the riot. It was all very well for the crack hunts in practically artificial forests, like those at Windsor, where the king hunted. But it was a different thing in the forest sauvage. Suppose His Majesty's famous hounds were to go running riot after a unicorn or something. Everybody knew that you could never catch a unicorn without a young virgin for bait, in which case the unicorn meekly laid its white head and mother-of-pearl horn in her lap. And so the puppies would go charging off into the forest for leagues and leagues and never catch it and get lost. And then what would Sir Ector say to his sovereign? It was not only unicorns. There was the beast Glatizant that everybody had heard so much about. If you had the head of a serpent, the body of a leopard, the haunches of a lion, and were footed like a hart, and especially if you made a noise like 30 couple of hounds questing, it stood to reason that you would account for an excessive number of royal puppies before they pulled you down. Serve them right, too. And what would King Pellinore say if Master William Twitey did succeed in killing his beast? Then there were the small dragons, which lived under stones and hissed like kettles. Dangerous varmints, very. Or suppose they were to come across one of the really big dragons. Suppose they was to run into a griffin. Sir Ector considered the prospect moodily for some time, then began to feel better. It would be a jolly good thing, he concluded, if Master Twitey and his beastly dogs did meet the questing beast. Yes, and get eaten up by it too. Every one. Cheered by this vision, he turned round at the edge of the ploughing and stumped off home. At the hedge, where the old lady lay, waiting to scare rooks, he was lucky enough to spot some approaching pigeons before she was aware of him or them, which gave him a chance to let out such a screech that he felt amply repaid for his own jump by seeing hers. It was going to be a good evening after all. "Good night to you," said Sir Ector affably, when the old lady recovered herself enough to drop him a curtsy. He felt so much restored by this that he called on the parish priest, halfway up the village street, and invited him to dinner. Then he climbed to the solar, which was his special chamber, and sat down heavily to write a submissive message to King Uther in the 2 or 3 hours which remained to him before the meal. It would take him quite that time, what with sharpening pens, using too much sand to blot with, going to the top of the stairs to ask the butler how to spell things, and starting again if he had made a mess. Sir Ector sat in the solar, while the wintering sunlight threw broad orange beams across his bald head. He scratched and pluttered away, and laboriously bit the end of his pen, and the castle room darkened about him. It was a room as big as the main hall over which it stood, and it could afford to have large southern windows because it was on the 2nd story. There were 2 fireplaces, in which the ashy logs of wood turned from gray to red as the sunlight retreated. Round these some favorite hounds lay snuffling in their dreams, or scratching themselves for fleas, or gnawing mutton bones which they had scrounged from the kitchens. The peregrine falcon stood hooded on a perch in the corner, a motionless idol, dreaming of other skies. If you were to go now to view the solar of Castle Sauvage, you would find it empty of furniture. But the sun would still stream in at those stone windows 2 feet thick, and, as it barred the mullions, it would catch a warmth of sandstone from them, the amber light of age. If you went to the nearest curiosity shop, you might find some clever copies of the furniture which it was supposed to contain. These would be oak chests and cupboards with Gothic paneling and strange faces of men or angels or devils carved darkly upon them, black, beeswaxed, worm-eaten, and shiny, gloomy testimonies to the old life in their coffin-like solidity. But the furniture in the solar was not like that. The devil's heads were there, and the linen fold paneling, but the wood was 6 or 7 or 8 centuries younger. So, in the warm-looking light of sunset, it was not only the mullions, which had an amber glow. All the spare, strong chests in the room, they were converted for sitting by laying bright carpets on them, were the young, the golden oak, and the cheeks of the devils and cherubim shone as if they had been given a good soaping. Chapter 15. It was Christmas night, the eve of the Boxing Day meet. You must remember that this was in the old merry England of Gramarye, when the rosy barons ate with their fingers, and had peacocks served before them with all their tail feathers streaming, or boars' heads with the tusks stuck in again. When there was no unemployment, because there were too few people to be unemployed. When forests rang with knights walloping each other on the helm, and the unicorns in the wintry moonlight stamped with their silver feet, and snorted their noble breaths of blue upon the frozen air. Such marvels were great and comfortable ones, but in the old England there was a greater marvel still. The weather behaved itself. In the spring, the little flowers came out obediently in the meads, and the dew sparkled, and the birds sang. In the summer, it was just beautifully hot for no less than 4 months, And if it did rain just enough for agricultural purposes, they managed to arrange it so that it rained while you were in bed. In the autumn, the leaves flamed and rattled before the west winds, tempering their sad adieu with glory. And in the winter, which was confined by statute to 2 months, the snow lay evenly, 3 feet thick, but never turned into slush. Brief thing, those of you who know the musical Camelot, which was based roughly on the Once and Future King, may remember the song Camelot, because that basically takes that whole theme of the rain must never fall until after sundown. By 6 the morning clouds must disappear. In short, there's simply not a more reliable spot for happily ever aftering than here in Camelot. So it's basically they've taken this paragraph and turned it into a whole song about how the weather's always perfect. It was Christmas night in the castle of the Forest Sauvage, and all around the castle the snow lay as it ought to lie. It hung heavily on the battlements, like thick icing on a very good cake, and in a few convenient places it modestly turned itself into the clearest icicles of the greatest possible length. It hung on the boughs of the forest trees in rounded lumps, even better than apple blossom, and occasionally slid off the roofs of the village when it saw the chance of falling on some amusing character and giving pleasure to all. The boys made snowballs with it, but never put stones in them to hurt each other, and the dogs, when they were taken out to scomber, bit it and rolled in it and looked surprised but delighted when they vanished into the bigger drifts. There was skating on the moat, which roared with the gliding bones which they used for skates, while hot chestnuts and spiced mead were served on the bank to all and sundry. The owls hooted. The cooks put out plenty of crumbs for the small birds. The villagers brought out their red mufflers. Sir Ector's face shone redder even than these, and reddest of all shone the cottage fires down the main street of an evening, while the winds howled outside, and the old English wolves wandered about, slavering in an appropriate manner, or sometimes peeping in at the keyholes with their blood-red eyes. It was Christmas night, and the proper things had been done. The whole village had come to dinner in hall. There had been a boar's head, and venison, and pork, and beef, and mutton, and capons, but no turkey, because this bird had not yet been invented. There had been plum pudding, and snapdragon, with blue fire on the tips of one's fingers, and as much mead as anybody could drink. Sir Ector's health had been drunk with "best respects, mister," or "best compliments of the season, my lords and ladies, and many of them." There had been mummers to play an exciting dramatic presentation of a story in which St. George and a Saracen and a funny doctor did surprising things. Also carol singers who rendered Adeste Fideles and I Sing of a Maiden in high, clear tenor voices. After that, those children who had not been sick from their dinner played hoodman blind and other appropriate games, while the young men and maidens danced Morris dances in the middle, the tables having been cleared away. The old folks sat round the walls holding glasses of mead in their hands and feeling thankful that they were past such capers, hoppings, and skippings, while those children who had not been sick sat with them and soon went to sleep, the small heads leaning against their shoulders. At the high table, Sir Ector sat with his nightly guests who had come for the morrow's hunting, smiling and nodding and drinking Burgundy or Sherry's sack or Malmsey wine. After a bit, silence was prayed for Sir Grummore. He stood up and sang his old-school song, amid great applause, but forgot most of it and had to make a humming noise in his mustache. Then King Pellinore was nudged to his feet and sang bashfully, "Oh, I was born a Pellinore in famous Lincolnshire. Full well I chased the questing beast for more than 17 year, till I took up with Sir Grummore here, in the season of the year. Since when 'tis my delight on a feather-bed night to sleep at home, my dear. You see, explained King Pellinore, blushing as he sat down with everybody whacking him on the back, old Grummore invited me home, what, after we have been having a pleasant joust together, and since then I've been letting my beastly beast go and hang itself on the wall, what? Well done, they told him. You live your own life while you've got it. William Twitey was called for, who had arrived on the previous evening, and the famous huntsman stood up with a perfectly straight face and his crooked eye fixed upon Sir Ector to sing, Do ye ken William Twitey, with his jerkin so dagged? Do ye ken William Twitey, who never yet lagged? Yes, I ken William Twitey, and he ought to be gagged, with his hounds and his horn in the morning. Bravo! Cried Sir Ector. Did you hear that? He said he ought to be gagged, my dear fella. Blessed if I didn't think he was going to boast when he began. Splendid chaps, these huntsmen, eh? Pass Master Twitey the Momsey with my compliments. The boys lay curled up under the benches near the fire, Wart with Cavall in his arms. Cavall did not like the heat and the shouting and the smell of mead and wanted to go away, but Wart held him tightly because he needed something to hug, and Cavall had to stay with him perforce, panting over a long pink tongue. Now, Ralph Passel, you! Good old Ralph! Who killed the cow, Ralph? Pray silence for Master Passel, you that couldn't help it. At this, the most lovely old man got up at the furthest and humblest end of the hall, as he had got up on all similar occasions for the past half-century. He was no less than 85 years of age, almost blind, almost deaf, but still able and willing and happy to quaver out the same song which he had sung for the pleasure of the forest sauvage since before Sir Ector was bound up in a kind of tight linen puttee in his cradle. They could not hear him at the high table. He was too far away in time to be able to reach across the room, but everybody knew what the cracked voice was singing, and everybody loved it. This is what he sang. When the old King Cole was a-walking down the street, he saw a lovely lady a-stepping in a puddle. She lifted up her skate for to hop across her middle, and he saw her ankle. Wasn't that a fuddle? He couldn't help it, he had to. There were about 20 verses of this song in which Wold King Cole helplessly saw more and more things that he ought not to have seen, and everybody cheered at the end of each verse until, at the conclusion, old Ralph was overwhelmed with congratulations and sat down, smiling dimly, to a replenished mug of mead. It was now Sir Ector's turn to wind up the proceedings. He stood up importantly and delivered the following speech. Friends, tenants, and otherwise, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. There was a faint cheer at this, for everybody recognized the speech, which Sir Ector had made for the last 20 years, and welcomed it like a brother. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, it is my pleasant duty, I might say my very pleasant duty, to welcome all and sundry to this our homely feast. It has been a good year, and I say it without fear of contradiction in pasture and plough. We all know how Crumbocky of Forest Sauvage won the first prize at Cardoyle Cattle Show for the second time, and one more year will win the cup outright. More power to the Forest Sauvage. As we sit down tonight, I notice some faces now gone from among us, and some which have added to the family circle. By the way, I'm going to finish this speech before we quit for the night. Such matters are in the hands of an almighty providence to which we all feel thankful. We ourselves have been first created and then spared to enjoy the rejoicings of this pleasant evening. I think we are all grateful for the blessings which have been showered upon us. Tonight we welcome in our midst the famous King Pellinore, whose labors in ridding our forest of the redoubtable questing beast are known to all. God bless King Pellinore. Hear, hear. Also Sir Grummor Grummersome, a sportsman, though I say it to his face, who will stick to his mount as long as his quest will stand up in front of him. Hooray! Finally, last but not least, we are honored by a visit from His Majesty's most famous huntsman, Master William Twitey, who will, I feel, show us such sport tomorrow that we will rub our eyes and wish that our royal pack of hounds could always be hunting in the forest, which we all love so well. Thank you, my dear friends, for your spontaneous welcome to these gentlemen. They will, I know, accept it in the true and warm-hearted spirit in which it's offered. And now it is time that I should bring my brief remarks to a close. Another year has almost sped, and it is time that we should be looking forward to the challenging future. What about the cattle show next year? Friends, I can only wish you a very Merry Christmas. And after Father Sidebottom has said our grace for us, we shall conclude with a singing of the national anthem. The cheers which broke out at the end of Sir Ector's speech were only just prevented by several hushes from drowning the last part of the vicar's grace in Latin, and then everybody stood up loyally in the firelight and sang, God save King Pendragon, long may his reign drag on, God save the king. Send him most glorious, great and uproarious, horrible and horrendous, God save our king. The last notes died away, the hall emptied of its rejoicing humanity. Lanterns flickered outside in the village street as everybody went home in bands for fear of the moonlit wolves, and the castle of the forest sauvage slept peacefully and lightless in the strange silence of the holy snow. And that's where we're wrapping up for tonight, because that's the end of the chapter. And next, we will be starting the next chapter later today at 7 p.m. So, with all of that said, I want to thank you so much for joining me. It is now 1 o'clock, so time has turned a widdershins on itself and devoured its own tail. But I don't care. As I said, I'm just going to be sleeping in. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me, all of you. It was a great pleasure to see you, and I hope I will see you again soon, one way or the other, in virtual form or in real life. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your friends and loved ones. Help out where you can. Peace. Super important. And I will see you either later today or next weekend. So, best of all wishes to you, and ciao, babies.